Good evening. How's everyone doing? Wonderful. I'm Chaplain Uwe Scharf, and I say this for posterity because we're going to film this. So at least you know who was hosting this evening. And it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our speaker for this evening, Michael Panitz. And we have a new series, Scripture on the Silver Screen. So I'm going to give the more elaborate introduction now, assuming that if you come back, when you come back, we can cut that a little short. But since some of you may not be familiar with him, I thought I would do this in a little bit more elaborate form first. So Michael Panitz trained at the Jewish Theological Seminary, where he was ordained as a rabbi in 1982, and where he received a PhD in Jewish history in 1989. Can you all hear me? All right, very good. Michael Panitz combines both specialties of history and theology in his professional career. He has served as a rabbi of Temple Israel in Norfolk since 1992. So they must somewhat like you, you know? Active in the field of adult Jewish education, he has taught for Jewish Community Center at Tidewater, the Jewish Museum and Cultural Center of Portsmouth, and many synagogues. He has been an adjunct professor of religious studies, history, and Hebrew language at local colleges, William and Mary from 1996 to 1999, Virginia Wesleyan University, used to be Virginia Wesleyan College, right? And that is from 1999 until present, so for 25 years now, and Old Dominion University in Norfolk from 2007 until present. Rabbi Panitz is committed to ecumenical dialogue and programming. For the past decade, he has served as the rabbi in residence at Christ and St. Luke's Church in Norfolk, which is an Episcopal church, preaching and teaching there regularly. I think that's quite remarkable, talking both about the ecumenism of the church and the ecumenical spirit of Michael. He has taught at approximately a dozen churches in Southampton Roads, the Eastern Shore, in North Carolina. Prior to arriving in Norfolk, Rabbi Panitz was a faculty member at the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York and served a congregation in New Jersey. Rabbi Panitz contributes articles to scholarly journals on Jewish subjects. Michael and Sheila Panitz have been married since 1978. Their larger family includes their 3 children, spouses, and 5 grandchildren, ranging in age from upper teens to infancy. Let me add on a personal note that Rabbi Panitz and I have been friends for many years. Actually, such a good friendship that at a recent occasion, he said, "We have been friends for over 20 years, which is not exactly true. We figured it out, it's about 12 years, but it feels like it has been a long time." And I got introduced to him in a group called Theophilus, which is an ecumenical group of, used to be clergy, but now it has widened. We also have lay members in there. And we usually meet about once a month at the rabbi's synagogue, at the rabbi's temple. And we have different speakers who give a little presentation about any subject of interest, very often related to philosophy and theology and religion. One more word, the rabbi has also come before last year's lecture series. Last year's lecture series was on world religions, which was very well received. He's also regularly guiding our Passover Seder celebration that this year will be in April. So in terms of the progression of our programming. Tonight it will be on Abraham. Then next time it will be on Moses. Then we have David and Bathsheba. Then we have one on Ruth. And what's our final one? And on Esther also. So in each time we will have movies beforehand. The one on Moses will be long, but we don't need to cut it into two parts. Actually, it would be a little difficult to do it. We would have to do the editing ourselves. So it will be in one sitting. It will be about 2.5 hours. So you may want to bring your popcorn, right? And this time we will experiment. We will have it on the Tuesday prior to the rabbi's lecture. It will be in here instead of doing in the Explorer room. I do want your feedback then and hear whether the picture and sound quality is better or worse than in the Explorer room. And according to that feedback, we might then decide to either stay here for the presentation or go back to the Explorer room. But now it's my distinct pleasure to ask Rabbi Panitz to come to the podium and to lead us in tonight's lecture and discussion. Welcome, Rabbi Panitz.
Thank you, Chaplain Uwe, for those warm words of introduction. And how nice it is to see you again. Many familiar faces in this gathering, and I'm frankly flattered that you've come back. So I hope not to disappoint. The series that we're starting this evening, as Chaplain named it, Scripture on the Silver Screen, is a particular interest of mine. In fact, I teach a course on this same subject at Virginia Wesleyan University. In that setting, it's entitled The Old Testament Through Film. But you get the sense of what this is. Because this is our first session of 5, not counting the Passover Seder, which is a different kind of a session, I'd like to give you some general words of introduction so that we can more clearly understand what is it that we are doing when we view and then discuss a cinematic retelling of a Bible story. Because I think we may have some untested assumptions about that deserve to be brought to light and thought about carefully. And then I will tell you some words of historical framing of this particular movie. And then for the last part of my presentation, I want to go through a section from the beginning of the film and a section from the end of the film to help you appreciate it more, perhaps more deeply. So first of all, introducing the series. What are the issues to bear in mind when experiencing the retelling of a Bible story? And in particular, when experiencing the retelling of a Bible story in a cinematic format. But let's think a little bit about this. Telling and retelling. The first difference that comes to mind is that telling is to an original audience, and retelling is either to those same people later on, as when you tell your child a bedtime story over and over and over again, or telling that story to a later audience constitutes a retelling. I want to emphasize that it's almost never automatic. We tend to put all sorts of changes into retellings. Perhaps you have a well-practiced, well-worn joke that you know by heart, but then you suddenly realize that this particular audience might not appreciate a turn of phrase or a nuance of that joke. So almost, adroitly and without thinking too much, you'll make a little change. When we retell, we have to take the new audience into mind. Now, multiply that by the number of years that have elapsed from the first audience of Bible stories to ourselves. Just think about it. The age of Abraham and Sarah, anyone want to hazard a guess as to how long ago that was? When do you think they lived? About 1,500 years before the Christian era? Something like that? So 3,500 years ago. The era of Moses, 200 years after that, perhaps. The era of David, 200 years after that. The era of Esther, 500, 600 years after that. Even the latest story in our series is well over 2,000 years old. How many default assumptions did the original audience have that we don't share? And how many automatic assumptions did they make that we fail to make? How many automatic assumptions do we make that they never would have thought of? So simply telling the story won't work. Whether we mean to or not, we live in a different age than the age when the Bible story was first told. So by definition, a retelling is something different. Now, I'm standing on this point a little bit because when it comes to Bible movies, we tend to have a certain habit of mind which we don't have when we look at movies that come from other books. I dare say you've probably seen the cinematic version of Charles Dickens' Christmas Story, right? Scrooge and Christmas Past and Christmas Present, right? And you may have read the book as well. And if it's not an exact fidelity between movie and book, you don't automatically say, well, the movie's worthless. Sometimes you say the movie's better than the book. Sometimes you say the book is better. But almost always we grant the movie the right to speak to us as it will speak to us. And I can remember certain experiences where the book moved me in a certain way and the movie moved me in a certain other way. I'll just give you one example. You might remember this book. It was the scariest book I read as a child because it was the Cold War nightmare of my generation. Did you ever read the book Failsafe? About the B-52 bomber that doesn't turn back and heads into the Soviet Union to destroy Moscow by a nuclear bomb. Remember that? Well, it was a very powerful book. And then Sidney Lumet, the great director, turned it into a very, very scary and powerful movie. And when I watched the movie, I wasn't thinking, well, it differed from the book in this, it differed from the book in that. I was very much moved by that. But when we watch a Bible retelling, sometimes our first thought is, well, this is no good because it's not in the Bible. I'm going to ask you not to reject that, but at least to hold it in abeyance. And instead to ask, what is the filmmaker trying to say? You might then appreciate it, or you might then say, well, we didn't need that. And we can disagree about these things. For example, I've left out some of the most famous Bible movies that you probably know. Do you know DeMille's The Ten Commandments? Okay. Do you know DeMille's Samson and Delilah with Victor Mature and Hubba Hubba Hedy Lamarr? Right? Well, if you learned your Bible from that, you would assume that the Bible is all about love triangles, right? Ramesses, Nefertari, and Moses, or Delilah, her sister, who isn't in the Bible at all, and Samson, right? That's not in the Bible. That's how Hollywood told a story in 1949 or 1956. Remember, these were commercial enterprises. They had to fill the seats. Hollywood audiences were expecting to be titillated. They're expecting spectacle. Hence, you have both, right? For about 20 years, from the late 1940s till the mid-1960s, you couldn't get a Bible movie without a go-go dance, some exotic dance, right? Think about it, right? The biblical dancers, right? It's not the June Taylor dancers, it's the biblical dancers, right? By the way, it's older than 1949. This goes back to the silent film era. DeMille had a 1923 version of the Ten Commandments, and he had an exotic dancer there. So I don't remember too many exotic dancers in the Bible. I mean, they knew about them, right? But it wasn't part of my Sunday school. So we should realize that artistic works have genres, right? A 5-line limerick has a genre. A 14-line Shakespearean sonnet has a genre. And these films have genres too. So we need to understand the genre logic of a genre to understand what is actually going on. The Bible has genres too, and I'll give you an example of how the Bible breaks a genre in order to make a very powerful point. The well is the singles bar of the book of Genesis. Where does Eliezer go to find a bride for the son of Abraham, which, by the way, is missing in our movie? Did you notice that? It says Abraham, but it didn't do all the life of Abraham. It stopped at chapter 22. It didn't give us the negotiations for the burial plot of Sarah, which is chapter 23. It didn't give us the finding of a bride for Isaac, which is chapter 24. And it didn't give us the final disposition of Abraham's estate, which is chapter 25. It stops at 22. But in chapter 24, Abraham sends his foreman, whom we otherwise call Eliezer, back to the old country to find a bride for Isaac. And where does Eliezer go? To the well. And he has this very complicated prayer that, dear God, may it be your will that when a woman should come to the well, and if I should ask her for a drink of water, and if she should say, yes, sir, and I'll water your camels as well, comma, then may it be your will that that should be the right bride for the son of my master Abraham. Next verse, along comes Rebekah, right? How about Jacob running away from home, getting to Uncle Laban's house in Padan Aram? Where does he show up? He shows up at the well. And who should come? Lovely Rachel. And Jacob, ka-thump, 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 and he falls all over her, and he sobs, and he kisses, and he tells her that they're cousins. Apparently they're kissing cousins. Right? So we've learned that the well is the singles bar. It's the place for romance. And then the Bible breaks that pattern with a very powerful story. Exodus chapter 2, Moses running away from the wrath of Pharaoh. Because remember, Moses killed the Egyptian who was murdering a Hebrew slave at that moment. And Moses saves the slave and kills the Egyptian. It gets known. Pharaoh wants to apprehend and kill Moses, so Moses flees. He goes to Midian. He goes to the well. He goes to the well. Cue the violins. 7 daughters come to the well. The daughters of Jethro, the priest of Midian. The the nasty shepherds come and start molesting them. Moses rescues the women from the evil shepherds. He drives the shepherds off. He waters the flock of the 7 shepherdesses. No romance. They go home. Their father says, "Why are you home early?" And they say, "An Egyptian man saved us and watered the flock too." An Egyptian man. He must have been wearing Egyptian clothing. They didn't get his name. He didn't get their cell phone number. There's no romance there. Breaks the genre. The father says, "What? You didn't invite him to come for bread? Bring him back." They find him, they bring him back, and the Bible says, I'm going to quote word for word, "Moses was content to dwell with the man, and he, the man, gave Moses the hand of his daughter Tzipporah in marriage." Could there be a less romantic courtship? But the Bible's trying to make a point. What is the passion of Moses? It's for justice. He is the man passionate about justice. So when you have a genre, you can break the genre creatively as well. But at least we need to know what the genre is. Now, something else about cinematic retellings. The cinema is a visual medium, which is why there's such a premium on impossibly handsome actors and impossibly beautiful actresses. Right? It's really not fair to the rest of us. By the way, I put in plenty of time as a high school guidance counselor. Was any of you ever a high school guidance counselor? Okay. Did you ever have a 17-year-old young woman who was so down in the dumps because she thought she was the least pretty girl in the class and she wasn't enjoying life at all? And you want to tell her, of course you can't. You want to tell her, just by virtue of being 17, you're probably in the top 10% of most beautiful women in the world. Just by virtue of being 17. But you can't say that. Of course you can't say that. So Hollywood has a selection process that would leave most of us out. But it's visual. And a lot is conveyed by good actors and good actresses by micro expressions. I don't know if you know the British actor Michael Kitchen. You know, what he can do is just a little twist of his mouth. He speaks volumes that way. And you saw the same thing in this movie. The actress Barbara Hershey, very, very fine actress, registering progressive disappointment and sadness as Ishmael is doing very, very well. And she gets more and more, and you see it in those micro expressions in her face. And then only in the next scene does she speak her mind to Abraham and tell him what she's worried about. So it's a visual medium. The Bible is not a visual medium. The way the Bible stories typically progress is mostly dialogue and interior monologue. The Bible would work very well as drama. It would even work very well as opera. But the Bible, you need to do a lot of translating to put the Bible on film. And as DeMille himself wrote in the introduction to a book about the Ten Commandments, a scholar can say, we don't know for sure. The probability is that Moses dressed this way or Tzipporah dressed that way, but we're not sure. The evidence doesn't permit such a firm conclusion. But DeMille says a movie maker has no ability to retreat to that. A movie maker must decide, what is this person going to look like? No choice in the matter. So a film, if you keep this one sentence in your mind, I think it'll help you. A film can never just retell the Bible. It has to translate it. It's always a translation to another medium, which is a medium of film. So if we keep that in mind, we might be more open to what the filmmakers introduced that we didn't get from the page of the Bible. We might ultimately disagree with them, or we might appreciate what they're trying to do. And these are matters of taste. Okay, so all that said, let me now turn to tonight's movie, Abraham. For starters, let me just take a quick show of hands. Who felt that it was more or less faithful to the biblical original, and who felt it was taking a lot of liberties? So who felt it was faithful to the biblical original? Let's just see a quick show of hands. Okay, and who felt it was taking a lot of liberties? Okay, more than that. Okay. I'm guessing that the liberties that you felt it was taking were based a lot on watching the first half of the film. Because, in fact, there's a notable difference between the first half and the second half. This was originally a two-part television miniseries in 1993. And then in 1994, it was re-released as a film. And I'll be telling you about that more in just a minute. I get the sense that, for whatever reason, the screenwriters, the movie makers, felt they needed to establish a lot about the world of Abraham at the very beginning. And the Bible doesn't feel the need to do that. Let's remember how the Bible introduces Abraham. Genesis chapter 11, we have a genealogy. The children of Noah after they left the ark. Shem, Ham, and Japheth, right? The children of Shem, so on and so on and so on and so forth. 10 generations. And the last generation before Abraham is Terach. And Terach has 3 sons, Haran and Nahor and Avram. And Haran dies young during his father's lifetime. And Nahor marries Milcah. And Avram marries Sarai. And Sarai was infertile. That's all we have from Genesis 11. Genesis 12, and the Lord said to Abram, leave your father's house, leave your native land, go to the land I will show you, and I will bless you. I will make your name great. People will bless themselves by you. Why did God choose Abram? Bible doesn't say. What was going on in Abram's life? Bible doesn't say. Was Avram happy where he was living or unhappy where he was living? Bible doesn't say. So notice that the Bible's aesthetic in telling a story is minimalist. The Bible tells you, in a sense, the minimum that it has to tell you to propel you along the way. I think that invites you to be a co-creator. To think, why did God say this to Avram? Now, we could come up with a number of possible answers. The rabbis, who were very keen students of the Bible, came up with 2 answers. They came up with more than 2 answers. By the way, if you don't know rabbis, we always take the liberty to disagree with each other. And we think that that's okay. We're not worried about disagreeing with each other, as long as it's done respectfully. So one rabbi says, God chose Avram because Avram had moral concern about the world. Avram wasn't willing to let all the evil that was done in the world go unchallenged. And Avram once raised his voice and said, all this evil in the world reminds me of a house on fire. Where's the homeowner organizing the bucket brigade to fight the fire? At which point God, who's been watching all along, says, finally, the one I've been waiting for. Avram, leave your native land. Go to where your saga is going to begin. So in other words, the rabbi who told that sidebar story, it's called a midrash in Hebrew. We could call it a sidebar story. The rabbi who told that sidebar story was asking himself the question, why did God say to Avram in Genesis chapter 12, leave your native land? Why Avram? Why not somebody else? What was special about Avram? There's 10 generations worth of descendants of Noah. The earth is filled. Why him? And the rabbi's answer is God wanted someone who felt the moral imperative so powerfully that he would make that central to his whole life. And that suited God's long-range plan of finally teaching God's human children how to live the right way. God's been waiting for someone to move the plan forward, to teach us to love each other, finally. Another rabbi saw it differently. Another rabbi told this story, which is closer to our film. The rabbi said, Terach, the father of Avram, not only worshipped idols, but he made them. Now, that's not in our story, is it? Not in our movie, and it's not in the Bible. But the movie borrows this and adapts it. Because who is this idol specialist in the movie? He's got an idol shop. Nahor, right? Nahor has an idol for every purpose, right? It's like some people have an herb, right? Like an herbal pharmacy, right? An herb for every purpose, right? You can't sleep, take this one. You have problems with infertility, take that one, and so on and so forth. Nahor, at the beginning of the movie, has an idol for producing sons. Remember that? And there's a little false base, and he has some spices in the base. Remember that? He tastes the spice, and he says, this will help you to sire a son. So Nahor is the idol specialist in this movie. That's not in the Bible. What is in the Bible about Nahor and Terach and idols? Only this from the book of Joshua, chapter 24. At the end of the conquest of Canaan, Joshua assembles all the Israelite tribes to re-ratify the covenant of Sinai that their parents had ratified under Moses. And Joshua says, remember, at the beginning, Terach was an idolater. And God took our father Avram away from that. And we started this monotheistic journey. So that's what the book of Joshua says. The rabbis took a good story and made it better. Not only was Terach an idol worshiper, he was an idol manufacturer. So in the rabbinic story, Abraham isn't yet a monotheist. He's a boy still, but he's worried. Which of all of these idols should I worship? Which is not an uncommon thing for a pagan to feel. There's so many gods in the world, I have to reverence them all, but I got a special feeling about one of them. When I taught you about Hinduism last year, remember I said there are some Hindu practitioners who have a special relationship to the goddess Lakshmi, or a special relationship to the god Shiva, or Krishna, or whatever it was. They had a thing for this one god or one goddess, right? That's not surprising. So Avram starts that way. He says, I want to worship the most powerful one of all. So he looks around, he thinks the sun. The sun is very, very powerful. Everything grows because of the sun. So according to the Midrash, Avram sits himself up on the hillside and he adores the sun all day long. Well, what happens after the day is done? The sun sets. Well, maybe the sun is not all powerful. It was full moon, the moon rose. Avram said, the moon. The moon has vanquished the sun. I'll worship the moon. He worships the moon all night long. What happens at dawn? The moon sets. The sun rises again. Now, every other person in the world at that time said, well, dummy, that's because there's a sun god and a moon god. Or maybe a moon goddess or a sun goddess or something like that. That's what they would have said. Avram, according to the rabbi, said, there's got to be one power that made all of this. He breaks through to monotheism. Then he's got a problem. I'm breaking through to monotheism, and Daddy makes a living making idols and selling them. Now let me ask you a question. Who remembers 1964? Who remembers the Surgeon General's report on cigarette smoking? You might have been a child, you might have been a parent. Do you remember the children flushing their parents' cigarettes down the toilet because they didn't want their parents, right, killing themselves by smoking what we used to call in the 1960s cancer sticks? Remember that slang? Think the parents were pleased? I don't think so. So, according to the story, Terach tells Avram, I got to go to market, watch the shop. And this produces a crisis of conscience. In walks a prospective customer, big strong guy. And Avram says, Sir, how can I help you? I want to buy an idol. Well, sir, what kind of idol do you want to buy? Oh, I'm a big strong guy. I want to buy a big strong idol. That one looks pretty big and strong. Avram says, well, you know, I watched my daddy making that yesterday. You think that a sculpture that my daddy made yesterday is more powerful than you and that you should worship it? You rotten kid, give me my money back. And he leaves. In walks a very sweet elderly lady. I want to buy an idol. Well, ma'am, what kind of an idol do you want to buy? I want an idol that's full of tenderness. Well, how about that one? Avram says, well, ma'am, with all respect, I saw my daddy make that idol a week ago. Do you think that an idol that was just a piece of wood a week ago is something that could help you? Oh, you impudent boy, give me my money back. She walks out. So far he's managed to scotch 2 sales. He takes a mallet. He smashes all the idols, except for one, except for the biggest one. Terach comes home. By the way, they didn't have insurance back then. Didn't have idle homeowners insurance. Certainly didn't have supplemental insurance. Terach says, Avram, what happened? Avram says, well, Dad, it was like this. I went to take care of the idols. I went to feed them. And this one said, I want to eat first. 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 He broke all the other idols. So Terach says, Avram, idols are just stone and wood. They can't do that. Avram said, would that Father's ear would hear what Father's mouth has just said. Terach wasn't pleased. He took Avram, this is called tough love. He took Avram to Nimrod, the head of the city. And Nimrod says to Avram, I need you to bow down to at least one of the gods of the city. I don't care which one. And Avram daisy chains him. He says, well, maybe this one, but this one's more powerful than that one. And that one's more powerful than that one. And he makes a whole circle. He gets back to the beginning. And Nimrod says, enough of this. Your life is forfeit. And he throws him into the fiery furnace. You know this from the book of Daniel, right? God does a miracle. Avram comes out of the fiery furnace unharmed. And God says to Avram, Genesis chapter 12, verse 1, leave your native land. That's the rabbinic story. Do you see how that is closer to our movie? Because in our movie, Avram destroys the idols. It's just that they're his brothers. So, was it from the Bible? No, it wasn't. Was it from the tradition of reading the Bible? Yes, it was. And I'll show you that again in another instance. So when we see part of the movie that is not from our biblical original, one of the questions to ask ourselves is, between the Bible and ourselves, there are thousands of years of readers. Let's see if what is shown up in the film had a precedent in what some of those readers were saying as well, which will deepen our appreciation a great deal. Now, a little bit more about this film, and then we're going to look closely at a couple of scenes. Abraham was the first in a series of television miniseries or standalone movies made between 1993 and 1998, all dealing with stories from the Hebrew Testament, the Old Testament. New Testament offerings followed in the same series in the year 2000 and 2001. Now it's called the TNT Bible Collection. TNT, Turner Network Television. Ted Turner. You know the name Turner? Okay. So Ted Turner got into the television business, and his company got a hold of this. Now, another group had done it first. It was originally an Italian producer, 5 Mile River Films. The Italian movie maker's name was Lorenzo Minoli. He's the genius behind all of these films. Minoli was a print journalist and then a documentary filmmaker before turning to his Bible retellings. Now, I told you before about the golden age of Hollywood. Do you remember the crossing of the Red Sea scene in the Ten Commandments? The walls of water, right? Do you remember the destruction of the temple of Dagon in Samson and Delilah? This huge, huge temple which comes crashing down when Samson pushes the pillars, and it all comes. It's a spectacle, right? Do you remember that the Ten Commandments has, quote unquote, a cast of thousands? Remember that? So those staples of Bible cinematic retellings from the 1940s and 50s and 60s, large-scale battles, hordes of extras, melodramatic plots, special effects galore, right? By the way, do you know how DeMille did the crossing of the sea? He had a swimming pool filled with jello, and he had some sculptors sculpt a pathway through the jello and tiny little figures, like action figures, and he shot it from high up and far away. And then he sluiced some water over the jello so it looks like the water coming down. Special effect, 1923. By the way, it was hot stuff then. Now we have computer-generated imagery, right? But back then it was really hot stuff. So the movie that we watched doesn't really rely on special effects. It doesn't rely on hordes of extras. It certainly doesn't rely on go-go dancers. Right? Doesn't rely on melodramatic plot twists, imagined love triangles. This movie represents a reaction against those films. This series, the series that Minoli was connected with in the Turner series, is more about naturalism in setting and acting and somewhat more fidelity to the text than those older films had. So where was this film made? It would look like it was made in biblical Canaan, right? It's supposed to look that way. Think about the topography that you see in the film. Desert, semi-desert, wadis. You know what a wadi is? It's a riverbed which is dry until it's filled suddenly with a flood of water. Remember when Abram is knocked over by a sudden flood of water and then he hears the voice of God in the first half of the film? Remember that? That's a wadi. Well, you would think that all this was done in the land of Israel. In fact, it was done in Morocco. The filmmaker found a location in Morocco and filmed all of these Bible films in that location. So a lot of them look alike because it's the same general location. So the desert wastes, the barren hills, the wadis, the oases, all of these give you visual markers that remind you of the Bible. That's what they're trying to do here. I must say, there's no accounting for taste. I prefer the naturalistic style of portraying the Bible to the big sword and sandal epics, like Ben-Hur with the chariot race or something like that. But I appreciate that, but it's like the difference between, I don't know, for those of you who know classical music, it's the difference between a big Mahler symphony and a Mozart symphony. Right? Mozart symphony is less overblown. It's more direct. So I tend to like it more. But if you like the destruction of the Temple of Dagon, that's perfectly fine. Now, what I'd like to do in my remaining time is look specifically at the divergences from the biblical story in order to establish certain things. I'm going to read a little bit of screenplay now and then. The very beginning, you see pastoralists with their flocks and their Bedouin-style tents. The sheep are bleating. The women are washing clothes in the river. It's designed to give you the sense of what was life like then. Why doesn't Genesis do that? Because its original audience didn't need that. That was their life. They knew what life was like then. We need it. They didn't need it. The first thing you see Avram doing, the very first thing you see him doing, is helping a mother ewe to birth its lamb. The very first thing. And the very first words out of his mouth are, soon, soon. And it turns out that this is a difficult delivery because the baby lamb is facing the wrong way. So think about it. What is the basic emotional problem that Avram faces in his life? No child. Right? Avram and Sarah, no child. So they go to the desperate expedient of a surrogate mother named Hagar. And how does that turn out for them? Not so well, right? So the very first thing you see, and it's not in the Bible, it's a sidebar story, shows Avram as a pastoralist, which he was, the Bible says that, but it shows him trying to help birth, which strikes me as so much the right way to start us off thinking about Abraham. And then Avram says to the little boy who's helping him, it appears she is not too anxious to face life, meaning the little baby lamb. Who can blame her? The world being the way it is. That's the very next thing that Avram says. And I want to submit that that's very carefully chosen words. And in fact, I think that's a very astute act on the part of the screenwriter, because it establishes Avram as a moral critic of the world as it is. Which goes back to the rabbinic midrash that I told you. Why did God speak to Avram and why not anybody else? God wanted someone who wasn't happy with the status quo. Wanted someone who would live his life trying to get the world to a better place. Someone who would try to mend the world rather than just succeed in it. And from the first two lines of dialogue, you begin to get the sense that Avram could be such a person. So again, this is not in Genesis 11. It's not in Genesis 11 and a half, but it makes a lot of sense. Then we have, by contrast, the depiction of his brother Nahor, who is, trying to sell an idol. And the customer says, "You have a God for every need, Nahor, even for my needs?" And Nahor says, "If you are prepared to become an accomplice to this God," he holds up an idol. "Which one is this?" "Sin, the god of fertility." There was a god Sin in the Babylonian world, and it was considered the moon god, and it was considered the god of fertility. Why is the moon god the god of fertility? I don't know. Here's my guess. My guess is that a lunar cycle is roughly comparable to a menstrual cycle. So it's somehow connected with the notion of fertility. That would be my guess. So we also see in those early scenes Lot's wife giving birth. Now, if you remember Genesis chapter 19, does Lot have sons or daughters? He has 4 daughters, 2 of them married already, 2 of them unmarried. So here we see Lot's wife, we don't know she's Lot's wife right away, giving birth to a daughter. And who's her midwife? Sarai. Sarai, the midwife, and not the mother. And when Lot's wife learns it's a daughter, says, I don't want her. Sarai is so hurt because she would do anything to have a child, boy or girl. And how could this woman be so insensitive to God's blessings as to scorn a daughter? And then later on, we see Avram saying to Terach, his own father, which is also not in the Bible, she's the best midwife in our community, and every time she helps a woman give birth, a little piece of her dies. Remember that? Very, very. Now, the Bible tells us that Sarai is infertile and that it's a problem, but look how the movie shows it. It doesn't tell it, it shows it. That's what movies do. One more aspect of the opening part of the movie that I want to share with you. The Bible tells you nothing about Abram's relationship to his father Terah. We don't know anything about it. And the rabbis don't tell us much either. The rabbis gave us this scene of Abraham in the shop, but that's not in the Bible. But after Avram has his revelation, right? The river washes him, it knocks him out. Maybe he was hallucinating, or maybe it was God's voice. Right? He hears God's voice, he repeats the words, remember that? And then you no longer hear God's voice, you only hear Avram saying them. At first he says them very hesitantly, questioningly, and then he says them confidently, as if he's come to recognize this is God's voice inside of me. I thought that was a very effective way. DeMille himself he was God's voice. Maybe that had something to do with his gigantic ego. But in this filmmaker, the filmmaker didn't need to be God's voice. The filmmaker let Avram himself, the actor Richard Harris, be the one to say God's voice. So, Avram tries to tell his family, we need to leave. And Nahor doesn't want to leave. I mean, he's making a lot of money. They're doing well, and they're able to afford a doubling of the tax rate and still do well. And then finally, Terach tells Nahor to leave, and he has this dialogue with his son. Avram, you're my son. You owe me obedience. Instead, you listen to this unknown God, a nameless God who whispers into your ear and bids you to leave your father's house, to break your heart and mine. What kind of God is this? Which is a plausible question if you're Terach. Or think about it. Terach has believed in the gods his whole life. He's not doubting that Avram had an experience, but it doesn't make any sense. What kind of God would ask you to break my heart? That's a good question. Avram says, I don't know, Father, but I heard his voice. It spoke to me above the silence of all the other gods. That's a powerful line. Avram is saying, none of those other gods has ever spoken to me. This one spoke to me. Now, it's hard to argue with that, but Terach says, you despise the gods who have given us protection and made us rich and allowed our children and herds to grow healthy and strong. You renounce all of our gods because you found a new God? Blech. And Avram says, I cannot stay, Father. As much as it grieves me, the thought of leaving you, I've heard him call to me. And Terach then says, I think these are very true words, but notice how his emotion changes. Avram, you are taking away my joy from our lives. I counted on you, my son, in the days to come. You have a new heart, and I don't know it. But you know mine. Go in peace, with the blessing of your God, whoever he is, and with mine. Terach extends his hand. Avram kisses his father's hand. That's how he takes leave of his father. I submit that's a beautiful scene. We have a father who doesn't understand the monotheistic revolution, but he understands that his son is a good man, and that his son is doing this because of some compelling reason. And even though he can't bring himself to understand it, and he will be sorry for the rest of his life, he can't blame his son for following his star. There's something inspiring about that. So that has to do with the liberties that the first half of the movie takes. I want to show you that the liberties in the second half of the movie, while there are fewer, they are very significant. So let's talk about the banishment of Hagar and Ishmael. And that's a very powerful scene from Genesis chapter 21. Genesis 21, the Lord took note of Sarah as he had promised, and she conceived and bore a son. Abram named the son Isaac, circumcised him on the 8th day. When Isaac was weaned, Abram held a great festival for the weaning of Isaac, and Sarah saw Ishmael, the son of Hagar, playing, sporting. Doesn't know what he was doing, but he was sporting. In the movie, he's jousting, he's shooting bows and arrows, and so on. Sarah says to Abraham, banish the slave woman and her son. I don't want him to inherit along with my son Isaac. It grieved Abram greatly on account of his son. And God said to Abram, listen to the voice of your wife Sarah, because through Isaac will your line be perpetuated. As for the woman and her son, I will make them great too. So in the morning, Abram loads up the woman and the son water, a pitcher of water on her shoulder, and he banishes them. They go wandering in the desert. When they run out of water, she puts her son down in the shade and walks off about a bow shot away, says, let me not see the death of my son. God heard the boy's crying where he was and said to Hagar, Hagar, lift up your son and look. And she looks, and there she sees a well of water. And he saves her with that water, and they learn to live in the desert. That's Genesis 21. Let's hear how this movie does it differently. We've just seen Ishmael winning his wrestling match against his cousin, and then doing very well with the bow and arrow, and doing very well with jousting, and Isaac follows him like a puppy. Right? And Sarah is getting more and more and more unhappy. First, Hagar is smiling at her son's victories. Then when she sees Sarah scowling, you can see her smile is freezing in the corner of her mouth. Very good actress, by the way, and showing that with just a little micro expression. So now let's listen to the scene, which is not in the Bible. What we had is the words that I told you. Let's see how this scene redoes that dialogue. The camera focuses on Sarah looking somber. Abraham, oh, wonderful, wonderful. The children, God, I love those children. Sarah, where is Isaac? Abram, Isaac? He's with Ishmael. Sarah looks down. Abram, what is it, Sarah? Sarah, I've seen something terrible tonight. You what? And that was the future. The future. The future. The future. Abraham doesn't get it yet. He lies down. He's still happy. He kicks his legs a little bit. The future. Whose future? Sarah, my sons. I don't want Isaac going into the mountains alone. He won't be going alone. He'll be going with Ishmael. I know. Ishmael teaches Isaac something every day. When he comes back, he'll know as much about the herds as the best of the herdsmen. And if he doesn't come back, why wouldn't he come back? Ishmael would do what Hagar tells him to. And Hagar would do anything to put her son in our son's place, the son that God gave us. Oh, Sarah, Sarah, you two have made no secret of your feelings toward each other. Sarah, every man in the tribe is now ready to follow Ishmael into the teeth of death. He's so much older than Isaac. He's headstrong, fearless. And then I looked at her mother, her husband. Such dreadful ambition burns in that girl's eyes. Oh, Sarah, oh, Sarah. Sarah, in time, and not much of that, God will take us. If we leave Isaac and Ishmael behind, who will inherit? Which of the two will lead? Abraham. Isaac is God's choice. He's the choice of God. And he loves his brother. Sarah, oh yes, he does. So much that if Ishmael asked Isaac, he would happily give away his birthright to please Ishmael. Now in the Bible, who gives away his birthright? Esau. See, but it's borrowing it from that chapter to put it into this chapter. To worship Ishmael, Abraham, Isaac is God's choice. That is God's promise. Sarah, tell me, without us, do you think that Eliezer could stand up to Ishmael and his mother? How would God ensure it would happen? It would be Isaac. Would he strike Hagar and Ishmael dead? You love both of your sons so much you don't see it. I love them too. We created this problem, and now God has put it in our hands to solve. That's not in the Bible, but it's a powerful interpretation of the Bible. We made this problem. I told you we've been married for 10 years, no baby. Let's go the surrogate route. Remember the Baby M case from New Jersey, 1978? Remember Baby M, the parents engaged a surrogate. She didn't want to give up the baby, went to court. Remember that? So this is surrogacy gone wrong. But listen to Abraham's next line. It's not in the Bible, but it is a pious, faithful reading of the biblical story. Sarah just said, we created this problem. And Abraham makes a confession here. And it's a powerful confession. He says, no, I created the problem. I did not have sufficient faith in the words of God. See, if I truly believed what God said to me in chapter 15 of Genesis, fear not, Abram, I am your shield, your reward is very great. And Abram said, what kind of reward? I'm going to die and everything's going to go to Damascus Eliezer. Abraham says, no. God says, no, come on outside, look at the stars. Remember that? Count the stars if you can count them. So numerous will your offspring be. Abraham says, I didn't have enough faith. If I had more faith than that, I would have said no to you when you said have a surrogate baby. And we wouldn't be in this. I created the problem. And Abram says, now the problem is ours to solve. But how? How? Sarah, send them away. Abram, send them away? Send them away? He can't believe that. Now, in the Bible, the next verse is, God says to Abram, I know you don't like this, but listen to her. But in the movie, you have sad music. Sarah looks down. The next scene, Abram is outside at night, and then he begins to walk back to the tent. Abraham says to Sarah, I believe the words you spoke are not yours alone, but God's will. Mother and son will be gone in the morning. So notice that the movie's making a choice here. It's saying it didn't require a fresh revelation by God. It required that Abraham think through, what did I do wrong? What do I need to do to make it right? It's a different theological stance. It's a stance which says repentance is ultimately going to take the place of continuous revelation. You have to develop morally to the point where you can correct yourself. Now, we can say that that's not the Bible, but we have to admit it's a mature reading of the Bible. See that? Now, one more divergence which strikes me as very significant, and this is the last one I'll share for now. There's no words between Abram's, Hagar, and Ishmael in the Bible. He sends her off. There are significant words here in the movie version. Abraham embraces Ishmael. Abraham, go with God. Ishmael, don't worry about us, Father. I know how to survive. Brave words. Abram, yes, you're doing well. Ishmael turns and leaves. Hagar turns and exchanges a look with Abraham, then she turns away and starts to walk off. No words. Abraham isn't willing for it to end that way. In the movie, Hagar, she turns to him. Abraham, remember the words of the Lord. Behold, I have blessed you, and I will make you a great nation. That's Genesis 16. Abraham wasn't there when God said that to Hagar in Genesis 16. Here in the movie, he knows those words. And he says that to her, and that's his last word to her. So instead of just banishing her wordlessly, he reassures her, God is going to be with you. Because we have to understand that this man is terribly broken up. He cares for her. I think he cares for her deeply. And of course he cares for their son very deeply. But she has to go. He knows it. And his heart breaking, he sends her with that blessing that he can still give to her. So I would think that the cumulative effect of this is to make Abraham even more humanized than the original reading would have it. And that, I think, is the ultimate goal of this generation of movie makers. The DeMille generation of the 1940s and 50s wanted to create biblical superheroes. Right? Moses, Charlton Heston's Moses, is a superhero. It's not true of the Moses of the 1990s movies, not true of the Moses of this very series, which we won't be watching. But if ever you want to see it, it stars Ben Kingsley. Wonderful, wonderful portrayal of Moses from this same series. The Prince of Egypt, the lovely animated film, that Moses is not a superhero. And we've never had any Moses superheroes since then. But here, with Abraham, we see that process beginning. Make your Bible heroes not stained glass windows. Don't make them larger-than-life cardboard cutouts. Make them people who are worthy of being exemplars for all the rest of us. That's what this generation of filmmakers is trying to do with Abraham and Moses and Joseph and so on and so forth. And if they're not perfect, that's okay. Only God is perfect. The Bible isn't important to us because people are perfect. The Bible is important to us because God, having made us, works with imperfect beings such as ourselves to try to move it forward. And if in the era of Abraham, I'll use a football metaphor, God moved the chains, one first down, and one more set of chains in the time of Joseph, where a brother learns to forgive a brother, then we can hope that eventually in Messianic times we'll get to where God wants us to be. So I hope you've enjoyed this unpacking of the first of our movies, and stay tuned for Moses next month.
Right, just like we did in the first series on world religions, we have an opportunity for the next 10 or 15 minutes to ask questions or comments. So I will come around, and if you raise your hand, then would you introduce yourself by name, and then have your question or comment, and Rabbi Panitz will respond. Who has the first question or comment? All right, over there. Okay, introduce yourself by name and then say your question, please.
Yes, you refer to the movie quite frequently, naturally. Will we be seeing that movie?
Do you mean the movie Abraham?
Yes.
Chaplain Uva, when did we show it here?
So we had because Abraham was such a long movie, we did part 1 2 weeks ago, so the first week of January, and then part 2 last week. Yes, yeah, so we already had both parts. Now, from now on, we will always have the movie just in one part. So a rather long movie on Moses next time. The other movies, I think, are around 2 hours or just under. So just for next time, you need to have your popcorn with you because it's about 2.5 hours.
But sir, I do have a suggestion. If you get onto your computer and put into your browser Abraham movie 1993 YouTube, it'll show you more than one YouTube copies of the entire movie, and you can simply click on it and watch the whole thing start to finish.
Yeah, many of these movies are available on YouTube, yes indeed, because they're in the public domain now, having been made for so many years ago. Another question or comment? All right, over there. Here you go.
Yes, I'm Gene Lorge. I just have a question. I know that movie makers take liberties when it comes to these kinds of things. There was one scene in the movie that kind of threw me aback, and that was the Egyptian scene.
Yes, when Abram and Sarah.
It almost like it was a crossover to kind of introduce Moses, the Moses scene, like the scenes later. But I don't recall when I read about Abraham in the Bible anything about Egypt.
Well, may I say that you're on the right track in understanding the Moses connection. But first of all, I'll give you the chapter and verse, then I'll say something else. In Genesis chapter 12, starting with verse 10 till the end of the chapter, now there was a famine in the land, so Abram went down to Egypt to reside there as an alien, for the famine was severe in the land. When he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarai, I know well that you are a woman beautiful in appearance, and when the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife, and they will kill me, but they will let you live. Say you are my sister. And then it goes on and on. Pharaoh conscripts her into his harem. God protects her. By the way, the Bible doesn't say what kind of plague God sent upon Pharaoh. Anybody want to guess what it might have been? We're all adults. I think God smote Pharaoh with erectile dysfunction. Because, I mean, what else would protect her honor more effectively than that? Now you know why I much prefer teaching adults to middle school. Anyway, so the first part of my answer is that yes, the second half of chapter 12 of Genesis is that episode. But I want to say something else. There are numerous parallels between that part of Genesis chapter 12 and the Exodus story. Let me just enumerate them. Famine that compels the descent to Egypt. Danger to the Israelites when they're in Egypt. The threat of killing the man while leaving the woman alive. That's Exodus chapter 1. Ultimately, God's harnessing the forces of nature to rescue the Israelites. So, in a sense, Genesis chapter 12, the second half of the chapter, is like the little acorn from which the whole oak tree of the book of Exodus grows. So, thank you for pointing that out. That's a very fruitful comment. I appreciate that. Maybe one more question or comment?
And the particular, just one quick comment, and I'll come to you. The particular plot of introducing your wife as a sister, that gets repeated again, doesn't it?
Oh, yes, I did want to say something about that. Let's remember the society that Abraham comes from. If Sarai's father were on hand, then in that society, the prospective bridegroom would negotiate with the father of the bride for the hand of the daughter. If the father is not on hand, the prospective bridegroom would negotiate with the brother for the hand of his sister. So Avram saying to Sarai, "Say you're my sister," is designed to give them some time to figure out a response if somebody wants to marry her. Maybe they could leave in a hurry. But what Avram didn't reckon on was Pharaoh, who doesn't have to ask permission of anybody because the Pharaoh is a tyrant, just conscripts her. At which point, Avram's plan wasn't good enough, and God has to enter the scene, which God does do to protect the honor of Mother Sarah. And later on, we have it again in the Gazan city of Gerar, and then later on, we have the same thing in Isaac's life. It's a threefold pattern in Genesis.
All right, we had one gentleman.
Sir, you had a comment. Chaplain Uva will bring you a microphone.
Hold on. Okay, who was it?
Sir.
Here we go. Start with your name, please.
Roger Furman. We watched both of those series, both of those halves of the book. Part one I liked. Part two I didn't like nearly as much. As a critic, what did you like this?
Well, I think that part one was more inventive, precisely because it had so much more work to do. It had to make the family of Terach look plausible. Part two was, it's like being in a swimming pool and having water wings. Right? Part two had the well-known story of the Bible to carry it along. I must say that I thought that the closing scene with Isaac and his father was heartbreaking. Do you remember when Isaac says to his father, "Bind me tightly," which is not in the Bible, but it is, you've heard me say this already, it is in the rabbinic retellings of the Bible. Why does Isaac want his father to bind him tightly? Because he doesn't want to wiggle and resist, and the knife will not go in cleanly, and he won't be a kosher sacrifice. So that's found in the ancient readings of the Bible. Of course, this film doesn't give credits like that. DeMille does give those credits at the beginning of the Ten Commandments. He says where he gets all his extraneous biblical stuff, but then he doesn't say what he got from Hollywood. This film doesn't even do that, but that part really, really struck me. And then, of course, you hear the ram bleating, which we know from Genesis 22. And I didn't see the ram being consumed on the fire. Maybe Peta had something to say about that. But at the very end, you see the fire burning, Abram and Isaac walking down together. So I had a little lump in my throat at that point. But I have to agree with you, just in terms of admiring the craft of the film, and people are free to disagree with me, I personally thought there was more inventiveness in the first half.
Well, let's give Rabbi Panitz once more a round of applause. So we will continue next month with the story of Moses. We will have the film of Moses again here in the Chesapeake Room the week before the lecture. The lecture will always be the second Tuesday of each month. But don't have a calendar right in front of me if somebody wants to look it up. The second Tuesday of the month, 7 p.m. And then the movie will be exactly 1 week beforehand. So we're not going to occupy the Wednesday and Saturday movie time. For those of you who much rather would watch James Bond and other movies, we will not be in competition with that.
I believe that the second Tuesday is February 11th,
Okay.
and then March 11th, I believe.
Yes, that could very well be. So the week before on a Tuesday right here, but we'll advertise it. Rabbi Panitz and I both live in Norfolk. So while we said this is from 7 to 8:30, we might have another 10 minutes where you personally can talk with the rabbi. But let's not occupy him for another hour. He has to go home. All right. Thank you so much, and come again.
Very good.
Very good. Thank you very much. Yes, I sure did.
I bet he goes, okay. I love the sight and sound that we see. Would that be the glamour part, like the movie showing it? To bring us all in on this? Okay, but they compare.
Turn the iPad off.
I'll
cut it off.
Have been hearing and seeing. Well, it does for me, because I love that part of the world.